Part 2. Local news crews arrived, but not to cover a scandal. They documented veterans finding jobs, families reuniting, and a community healing. Across town, Edward's charity gala was half empty. The real story was here. Late that night, after the last veteran left with a job offer in hand, Vivian found one final video from Charles on her computer. His familiar face appeared, and he smiled. "Vivian, if you're watching this, it means you made the right choice. The foundation was never about punishing you, it was about showing you who you truly are, a leader, a healer, someone capable of making a real impact." Vivian felt Lily's hand on her shoulder as they watched together. "I knew the country club life was never enough for you," Charles continued. "You just needed a reason to leave it behind. Take care of our family, all of them. And remember, true wealth isn't in our bank accounts, it's in the lives we touch." The screen went dark. Through the window, Vivian saw the foundation's sign glowing in the night. Tomorrow, they would help more people. And the day after, even more. "Mom," Lily whispered, "I think I want to stay. Help run the foundation." Vivian hugged her daughter, recalling her own mother's words about dignity and purpose. Outside, Palm Springs was changing, one veteran, one job, one family at a time. Vivian Caldwell, who once measured wealth in designer labels and social prestige, finally understood the meaning of real riches. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for now, she was exactly where she needed to be. The next morning, the headlines read, "The Caldwell Foundation under investigation." Vivian muted the television in her office as John rushed in. "Edward filed a complaint with the state," he reported. "He's claiming we're misusing funds." Frank called an emergency meeting, gathering the foundation's core team, Vivian, Lily, John, Maria, and now Janet, who was working part-time at the front desk. "They've frozen our accounts," Frank announced grimly. "All of our veteran programs are on hold." "That's not all," Maria added. "Edward is offering to buy out the business loans for our veterans who are graduating from the program. Some are considering it." Vivian opened her mother's diary, drawing strength from the familiar words. "What would Charles do?" Frank looked up. "Actually, Charles left instructions for this exact situation." Frank looked up. "Actually, Charles left instructions for this exact situation." He inserted a DVD into the player, and Charles's face appeared on the screen, looking more tired and worn than in earlier recordings. "Vivian," Charles said slowly, "if you're watching this, it means Edward has made his move." He paused, then continued, "Look in the safe behind the painting in my old office." Frank got up, walked over to the painting, and opened the hidden safe. Inside lay a thick folder labeled Bennett Family Holdings. Charles's voice went on, "Edward's family has been siphoning funds from their own charities for years. I've gathered proof. Use it if necessary." Vivian opened the folder, her eyes scanning the documents, tax fraud, embezzlement, and years of corrupt dealings. Lily looked over her mother's shoulder and gasped, "We could expose everything. This could destroy them." Vivian shook her head, closing the folder. "No. We're not like them," she said firmly. "There's a better way." She picked up her phone and dialed Edward. "We need to talk." An hour later, Edward sat across from her in Charles's old office, looking pale and uncomfortable as Vivian laid out her terms. "You're going to drop the investigation," she said calmly. "Restore our funding and publicly endorse the foundation." Edward's voice was tense. "Or what? You'll expose my family?" "No," Vivian replied softly. "I'll help you fix what's broken, the way Charles helped me." Edward scoffed bitterly, a half-hearted laugh escaping him. "And why would you help me?" Vivian handed him a photograph she'd found in her mother's diary. It was an old, faded image of their mothers together, young and smiling, dressed in housemaid uniforms. "Because our mothers were friends before money tore their paths apart. Because we're both better than our worst mistakes." Edward stared at the photograph for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. So, what's your plan? We merge your charity with our foundation. Together, we'll be able to help more people than either of us could alone. As Edward left to consult with his lawyers, Lily hugged her mother tightly. How did you know he'd listen? She asked, her eyes full of admiration. Vivian smiled, a hint of wisdom in her gaze. I didn't. But I remembered what it feels like to need a second chance. That afternoon, Vivian visited her old mansion, now empty and on the market. In Charles's study, she found a DVD labeled Play When You're Ready. She wasn't sure what to expect but pressed play anyway. The screen came alive, showing Charles, younger and vibrant, standing in front of the mansion. Vivian, he began, if you're watching this, it's been years since I recorded it. I'm making this video the day after our wedding. Vivian gasped, clutching the arm of the chair. Charles continued, your mother just told me why she arranged our marriage, not to save you from scandal, but because she saw something in you that you couldn't yet see in yourself, greatness, the kind that comes from helping others. Tears welled up in Vivian's eyes. I promised her I'd help you find that greatness, even if it took a lifetime, even if you had to lose everything first. The video showed Charles pacing through the empty mansion. This house, the parties, the status, it's all meaningless. True wealth is in the lives we change. As the video ended, Vivian heard footsteps. Lily, John, and Maria stood in the doorway. The lawyers called, Lily said. Edward agreed to everything. Vivian looked around the study one last time. Then let's turn this place into something better. What do you mean? John asked. This mansion was built to keep people out, Vivian replied. Let's make it a place that welcomes people in. Maria's eyes lit up. A training center? Even better, Vivian said with a smile. A home for the foundation, where everyone is welcome. As they walked through the empty rooms, Vivian remembered her first day here as a young bride, terrified of not fitting in. Now, she finally felt a sense of belonging, not as the mansion's owner, but as part of something larger than herself. The next day, they announced the merger with Edward's charity. The foundation was set to expand, helping more veterans, more families, and enabling more dreams. That evening, Vivian returned to Charles's study, her finger hovering over the start button for one final message, one last truth. Mom. Lily's voice interrupted softly. Everyone's here for the board meeting. Tell them to wait, Vivian replied, pressing play. Charles's face appeared, recorded just days before his death. Vivian, there's something you need to know about Frank and me, something that happened 40 years ago. Vivian leaned forward, her heart pounding. Frank wasn't just my friend from the orphanage. He was my brother. Vivian paused the video, her mind reeling. In the conference room, the new joint foundation board waited. Edward sat uncomfortably next to Frank, now co-directors. Gathering herself, Vivian entered the room, visibly shaken. Frank, she said quietly, we need to talk. Back in the study, Frank watched the video, his hands trembling as Charles's voice continued, weaker now. I found out a month before my diagnosis. Our birth records were sealed, but the orphanage kept files. Frank and I were separated as babies, adopted by different families. I knew, Frank admitted quietly, looking at Vivian. I found out years ago. Why didn't you tell him? Vivian asked. Because he was happy, Frank replied. He had a good life. I didn't want to complicate it. The video continued, Charles's voice fading. Frank protected you, Vivian, and our family for years. Now it's your turn to protect him. Vivian recalled every interaction with Frank, all the times she'd thought of him as just an employee. Softly, she whispered, Janet's depression, it wasn't just about being let go, was it? Frank shook his head. She couldn't bear seeing her husband's brother treated like nothing. A knock interrupted them as Maria entered with news. The veterans from our first program are here. They want to discuss Edward's offer. In the main hall, 30 veterans stood with their families. Robert Anderson stepped forward, speaking for them. Mrs. Caldwell, we've made a decision. We're staying with the foundation. But Edward offered you better terms, Vivian said, surprised. Money isn't everything, Robert replied. You taught us that. Edward watched from the doorway, his expression unreadable. Turning to the crowd, Vivian addressed them, this foundation isn't just about business. It's about family. She shared the story of Charles and Frank, of hidden truths and second chances. From today, every graduate of our program is part of this family. And family sticks together. One by one, the veterans tore up Edward's offers. Later that evening, Vivian visited Janet in the hospital's rehabilitation wing. I should have told you, Janet said weakly, about Frank and Charles. No, Vivian said, taking her hand. I should have seen it, the way Charles trusted Frank, the way they always looked out for each other. He wanted to tell you so many times, Janet murmured. But he said you needed to learn compassion first. Vivian squeezed Janet's hand gently. I'm learning. Back at the foundation, Lily and John were organizing the first graduation ceremony. 50 new businesses, all set to start next month, Lily announced proudly. Vivian watched as Frank worked late in his office, Charles's office, now their office. She knocked softly. I'd like to change the foundation's name, she said. Frank looked up. To what? The Caldwell Miller Foundation. Both brothers' names. Frank stood, eyes shining, and finally, after 40 years, he hugged his sister-in-law. Outside, the sun was setting over Palm Springs. Edward's car pulled away, he had much to consider. Maria locked up for the night, smiling at the new sign being installed. Tomorrow would bring fresh challenges, but tonight, a family felt whole again. Vivian touched the foundation wall, recalling Charles's words, true wealth is in the lives we change. She was finally ready for the last video, the one that explained why Charles had planned every detail so meticulously. The morning of the foundation's first graduation ceremony, Vivian found an envelope on her desk. Inside was a USB drive with a note, play this at today's ceremony. Lily looked over her shoulder. It's probably another threat from Gregory. Vivian inserted the drive into her laptop. The video opened to Gregory in a hotel room. Vivian, by the time you see this, I'll be on my way to testify against Edward. There's something you need to know about the night Charles died. Vivian's hands trembled as she pressed play. I was there, Gregory admitted. Edward sent me to get Charles to sign some papers, but Charles already knew what we were planning. He looked me in the eye and said, I'm giving you a chance to change too. The foundation's main hall was filled with graduates and their families. Frank entered Vivian's office, noticing her expression. What's wrong? He asked, seeing the shock on her face. Without a word, Vivian replayed the video for him. Gregory's confession continued, revealing the dark history Edward had tried so hard to conceal. Charles wasn't just after the foundation, Gregory disclosed on the recording. He wanted revenge. Charles had evidence of Edward's father stealing from the orphanage fund 40 years ago, the same orphanage where Charles and Frank grew up. Suddenly, a commotion erupted downstairs. Edward burst into the office, his face flushed with anger. You can't show that video, he demanded, his voice shaking with desperation. Your father stole from orphans, Vivian stated firmly, facing Edward with newfound strength. That's why you really hate this foundation. It's not about competition, it's about covering up your family's crimes. My father built his empire on stolen money, Frank added quietly, standing beside Vivian. Money that could have changed so many lives and kept families together. Edward's eyes darted around the room as security approached. He pulled out his phone, a last-ditch threat. One call, and I'll release every scandal and secret. Are you sure you want to risk that? Vivian stood her ground. Go ahead. We have nothing left to hide. She met Edward's gaze, unflinching as the graduates and their families watched from the main hall below. With no options left, Edward was escorted out of the building. Turning to the assembled crowd, Vivian addressed them with a quiet conviction. Today isn't just about business or success. It's about truth, about facing our past so we can build a better future. She played Gregory's video for everyone to see, then queued up Charles's final message. Charles's familiar, weary face appeared on the screen. Vivian, he said with a gentle smile, if you're watching this, it means you've learned the hardest lesson of all, real change begins when we face our own mistakes. As the video played, old footage of the orphanage filled the screen. Charles's voice continued, every child here could have had a better life if the money meant for them hadn't been stolen, including Frank and me. Edward stood at the back, watching, his head bowed as he absorbed the truth. But revenge isn't the answer, Charles continued. That's why I created this foundation, not to punish, but to heal, to give others the chance we never had. The video paused on a scene of Charles looking reflective. Vivian glanced at Edward, who seemed defeated, then turned back to the audience. She walked slowly to the podium, her voice steady. The papers Edward wanted Charles to sign would have hidden his father's crimes forever. But Charles believed in making things right, not in hiding them. The hall was silent as Edward stepped forward, his face drained. With a resigned sigh, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a checkbook. My father stole that money, he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. And I've spent my life protecting his lie. Pausing, he looked out over the audience, then added, I can't undo the past, but I can help build the future. With Edward's donation, the ceremony continued, honoring the foundation's 50 new graduates, each one with a story of resilience and growth. Sarah's cleaning cooperative received its first major contract, and John's veteran program was set to expand across 3 states. Later, Vivian found a note from Gregory, acknowledging Charles's belief that everyone deserves a chance to change. Frank hung the new foundation sign, Caldwell Miller Foundation, Building Second Chances. That evening, Vivian visited Charles's grave. You planned everything, she murmured, even Edward's redemption. Lily joined her, her voice soft. Mom, are you ready to watch Dad's last video? Vivian nodded. Tomorrow. Tonight is for the graduates. They watched the sun set over Palm Springs, a city healing from its past wounds. The foundation still faced new challenges, but tonight, they celebrated the power of second chances, not only for veterans and families, but for everyone who needed a fresh start. 1 year later, the transformed Caldwell mansion buzzed with life. Where grand chandeliers had once hung, modern training rooms now held classes for veteran entrepreneurs. The former ballroom had been turned into a co-working space open to the community. Vivian stood in what had once been her old bedroom, now a computer lab where John taught coding to retired service members. The first anniversary celebration begins in an hour, Lily reminded her with a smile. The foundation had exceeded every dream they had, supporting 500 graduates, creating over 3,000 jobs, and opening branches in Chicago and Miami. Frank had recovered fully and now served as chairman emeritus, while Janet managed senior outreach programs. Sarah's cleaning cooperative employed over 100 women, all over 60 years old. Mrs. Caldwell, Robert Anderson greeted her warmly, the press is here for the ceremony. Vivian looked out at the gathering crowd, seeing Edward sitting quietly in the front row, a prison-issued ankle monitor around his leg. His testimony had exposed decades of charity fraud, earning him house arrest instead of prison. Gregory was there too, now leading the foundation's fraud prevention program, using his past to help families recognize and avoid con artists like he once was. Ready, Mom? Lily whispered, squeezing Vivian's hand. Vivian took a deep breath and stepped up to the podium. 1 year ago, this mansion represented everything wrong with wealth and privilege. Today, it stands for something else entirely, the power of second chances. She gestured to the graduates. These entrepreneurs have proven that success isn't defined by who you know or where you come from, but by the choices you make. The ceremony honored their achievements: Robert's security firm, Sarah's cooperative, and John's veteran tech program. Each success story marked a step toward healing old wounds. As the applause died down, Frank joined Vivian at the podium for one final announcement. "We have received official approval," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "The orphanage where Charles and I grew up will be rebuilt as a center for children aging out of foster care." Edward stood, his expression humbled. "My father's crimes destroyed that orphanage," he said, his voice shaky. "Today, my family's fortune will help rebuild it." Vivian watched as their vision unfolded: veterans teaching business skills to foster kids, elderly women mentoring young entrepreneurs, and a community dedicated to healing itself. "It's time," Lily whispered to her mother. Vivian nodded. They had waited a full year for this moment. As a screen lowered in front of the crowd, Charles's final video began. "My dearest Vivian," his voice filled the room, gentle yet strong, "if you're watching this, a year has passed since everything changed. Our family, our entire family, has found its purpose." The video showed clips from their 40 years together, moments filled with laughter and love. Charles's voice continued, "I kept so many secrets. About Frank being my brother, about John being my son, about your mother arranging our marriage. But my biggest secret was this." The screen faded to black, leaving everyone on the edge of their seats, waiting for the ultimate revelation, the one final truth that had brought them all here, binding them together through second chances, hope, and the unwavering belief that true wealth lay in the lives they had touched. Vivian's hands trembled as Charles's final words echoed in her mind. "I never stopped believing in you," he'd said. Tears flowed freely now as she recalled the times she'd lost her way, when wealth and status became her refuge. "I knew the real Vivian was still there," Charles had continued, "the woman who taught me to love again, the woman capable of building something greater than fortune." Charles's face grew serious on the screen. "I didn't create this foundation to punish you. I created it to free you, to show you that true wealth isn't in what we own but in what we give, who we help, and how we love." The screen shifted to recent footage of the foundation: graduates receiving certificates, families reuniting, lives transformed. "This is your real inheritance, Vivian, not money or property, but purpose, family, and love." As the video ended, Vivian looked around her transformed world. Lily was leading educational programs, John expanding veteran services, and Frank and Janet counseling families. Maria was empowering older workers, Edward was funding new beginnings, and Gregory was preventing future fraud. Charles's voice returned for one last instruction. "In my private safe, there's a letter from your mother. She wrote it the day before our wedding. It's time you read it." Vivian opened the envelope with trembling hands, reading aloud, "My dearest daughter, today you marry a man who needs your light as much as you need his strength. Together, you'll build something greater than wealth, you'll build hope. Never forget that true class isn't in what we wear but in how we lift others up. All my love, Mom." A hush fell over the room. "That's what the foundation really is," Vivian said finally. "It's not a charity or a business, it's a family, one that grows stronger with every person we help." Outside, Palm Springs sparkled in the sunset. The mansion gates, once locked to keep people out, now stood permanently open. "Ready for another year?" Lily asked. Vivian looked around at her gathered family, related by blood, marriage, and the shared purpose they had chosen. "I'm ready for a lifetime," she replied. That night, Vivian walked through the transformed mansion one last time. Every room was now dedicated to helping others, every space designed to offer hope. In Charles's old study, now a veteran counseling center, she placed her mother's diary in a display case. Beside it, she added Charles's videos, Gregory's confession, Edward's testimony, and Frank's orphanage records, a full account of their journey in truth. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to serve. But tonight, Vivian Caldwell finally understood the lesson her mother had taught her long ago: true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in lives changed, hopes restored, and hearts healed. Turning off the lights, she caught her reflection in the window, not a socialite, but a servant. She was wealthy, not in money, but in purpose, the way her mother had always wanted, the way Charles had believed, the way she had finally become. The Caldwell Miller Foundation would continue changing lives, one second chance at a time, one family member at a time, one act of love at a time. And somewhere, Vivian knew her mother and Charles were smiling. As she prepared to leave for the night, voices drifted from the training center. A group of evening students, veterans and seniors taking computer classes together, were gathering their things. "Mrs. Caldwell," called a familiar voice. It was Martha Chen, the reporter who had once broadcast Vivian's scandals. "I'd like to do a follow-up story, not about the past, but about the future." Vivian considered for a moment. "Come back tomorrow," she said, "there's something you should see." The next morning, Martha watched as Vivian unlocked a storage room in the mansion's east wing, revealing dozens of boxes. "These are Charles's personal archives," Vivian explained, "records of every person who ever worked for us, every housekeeper, gardener, driver. People whose dreams we ignored for 40 years. With Lily and John's help, they carried the boxes to the foundation's main office. Each of these people will receive an invitation," Vivian announced to Martha. "Not for charity, but for partnership. Their children will get scholarships, and their business ideas will receive funding." "Why now?" Martha asked, surprised. "Because a true legacy isn't just about fixing past mistakes. It's about preventing future ones." As if on cue, Edward arrived with news from Washington. "Congress has approved new regulations for family foundations," he explained. "Rules I helped write based on my own experience. Every wealthy family in America will now have to prove they're actually helping people, not just avoiding taxes." Gregory stepped in with an announcement of his own. "Former con artists from across the country are joining our fraud prevention program," he said proudly, "using their skills to protect vulnerable people instead of exploiting them." Maria shared plans for expanding her senior cooperative nationwide. Frank and Janet announced a mentorship program pairing retired executives with veteran entrepreneurs. As Martha took notes, Vivian looked around at her family, an incredible tapestry of second chances, restored dignity, and shared purpose, all working to expand their mission. "The real story," Vivian told Martha, "isn't about my transformation. It's about what happens when we stop seeing wealth as a wall that separates us and start seeing it as a bridge that connects us." That evening, after Martha left, Vivian made a final visit to her mother's old house. In a kitchen drawer, she found something she'd missed, a recipe box filled with notes her mother had written to Charles over the years. The last one, dated just before her death, read, "Take care of my daughter, not by giving her everything, but by helping her give everything away. That's where true happiness lives." Vivian clutched the note to her heart, finally understanding the greatest inheritance of all, the capacity to love, serve, and lift others up. Driving back to her small apartment, past the glittering mansions of her old life, she felt no regret or longing. She had found something far more precious than luxury, she had found purpose. And that, Vivian knew, was the greatest wealth of all. If this story touched your heart, please hit the like button and share your thoughts in the comments below.